Our thanks to Tom, and Ben Carson joins us now from Tennessee. Good morning, Dr. Carson. I want to start with that evening meeting in Washington with other campaigns about debates going forward. What do you want changed specifically?
Well, we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of a debate? And the real purpose is to allow the voters to have an opportunity to see what's behind each of the candidates. What do they actually think about the various policies that are affecting the lives of everyday Americans? If you make that the goal, that will help you define how the debate should go. And some of the things that we've seen recently, that certainly was not the goal.
So what would you like changed specifically? The number of participants, the moderators?
Well, I would like to see us be able to have, a substantial opening statement, at least a minute, a substantial closing statement, at least a minute. And I would like to see, tighter guidelines in terms of people when they respond to questions. Some people just pretty much ignore what the time constraints are. Others are very careful to stay within them. And I think that creates inequality. So, we need to just tighten it up a little bit and do it more like a professional type of debate.
And what about the moderators? There's been a lot of criticism. What do you think the criteria should be for moderators?
Well, I think that we should have moderators who are interested in disseminating the information about the candidates as opposed to, gotcha, you did this, and, well, you defend yourself on that. What is very important right now, we have so many incredible problems that are facing us as a nation. We're being divided. We're fiscally irresponsible, which is creating an unstable economic foundation. We're not taking an appropriate place in the world in terms of leadership. All of these things have tremendous impact, not only on us currently, but on our children and our grandchildren. And we've got to get serious, all of us. These, as far as I'm concerned, shouldn't even be partisan issues. We've got to come up with the best solutions, and we've got to do it pretty quickly.
Dr. Carson, you talk about gotcha questions, but should the candidates be challenged? Don't you want to hear what they have to say and have that challenged by a free press?
There's a place and time for that, but as far as I'm concerned, these debates are to highlight the differences in philosophy between the candidates, particularly when you have as many candidates as we have now. The people need to be able to find out what is the thing that distinguishes each one of us. You can spend forever, combing back through somebody's history and say, in 1942, didn't you say, yeah, come on, give me a break. We need to mature in the way that we do these debates if they're going to be useful to the American people.
You saw this week the president's plan to put 50 special operations forces on the ground in Syria. Do you agree with the president's plan?
I think that's a move in the right direction because we clearly need to have those special ops in lots of different areas, but certainly in terms of helping to guide what the Air Force is doing. I think it's a good idea. I actually agree with that. But I think that that's only a small part of it. We need to have a much bigger plan when it comes to battling, the global jihadists, because they have big ideals.
What's your much bigger plan for Syria?
Way of life.
Let's do the specifics right here. What's your much bigger plan for Syria?
Well, my much bigger plan involves, Putin and Iran also. I mean, those are the forces that are propping up the Assad regime. And even though Putin came in there and said that he was going to fight ISIS, he's really fighting the anti-Assad forces. What we need to be thinking about is how do we oppose him? First of all, look where most of the refugees are, at the Turkey-Syrian border. I think we should establish a no-fly zone there, and we should enforce it. We should be doing this in communication with Putin to try to decrease the likelihood of conflict and keeping the forces apart. But also, we need to be opposing him in other parts of the world. It's not just keeping his influence out of the Middle East, which he truly wants, but also in his own area of the world, the whole Baltic Basin. We need to have more than 1 or 2 armored brigades there to show some strength. And particularly, you look at the Baltic states, they're really quite nervous about him. And when they look at what we did with Ukraine, or what we didn't do, they have good reason to be nervous. We need to reestablish ourselves in that area. We need to give Ukraine offensive weapons. We need to reestablish a missile defense system in the eastern bloc of countries so that we oppose him. Let's keep him on the run. We need to recognize that, you know, his fuel is oil. And we need to do everything we can to develop our energy resources at an economical rate so that we keep the oil prices down, which keeps him in his little box. Those are things that we need to be thinking about on a global basis.
Quickly on China, the U.S. recently sent a guided missile destroyer within the 12-mile territorial border of the in the South China Sea of those man-made islands. Is that enough of a statement from the U.S. toward China, which claims these islands as their own?
Well, you know, all of our friends, you know, in that whole region, I think, are very relieved to see us doing that. You know, Australia also is doing that. You know, we need to challenge these boundaries that are not legal.
So is this enough, sending a guided missile destroyer in?
It's a good start. I hope we continue to do those kinds of exercises.
And just a final question, Dr. Carson. You've said you worry about the future of our country. You've compared our country to the Roman Empire. Do you really believe our country could fall, collapse?
I believe that our country's biggest threats come from within, from failing to address our incredible fiscal irresponsibility. By allowing our populace to become enemies with each other, stirring up hatred and strife within our country, by allowing the education to take a second seat, by giving it a lot of lip service, but not actually taking care of it. One of the things that allowed us so rapidly to advance early on was the fact that we had a relatively well-educated populace. And Alexis de Tocqueville was so impressed with that when he came over here to study America. We only have 330 million people in this country. We have to compete against China and India, who have more than 1 billion people. We have to develop all of our people. And we have to start thinking in a group sense of how do we develop and make America a place of success for everybody.
Thanks very much, Dr. Carson. Coming
Now, the ARB, after conducting, Madam Secretary, more than 100 interviews, identified specific employee and a specific employee at the State Department who denied these requests. It was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, Charlene Lamb, and again, she did come before the Oversight Committee. The ARB report was very critical of her. It was also critical of her 2 supervisors, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security. The Oversight Committee found the same answer as the ARB. It found that this official denied these requests, and it found no evidence that you approved or denied them. The problem is that Republicans just keep asking the same question over and over again and pretend they don't know the answer. In 2013, the Republican chairman of 5 House committees issued a report falsely accusing you personally of denying these requests in a cable over your signature. The next day, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, Darrell Issa, went on national television and accused you of the same thing. Can we play that clip, please?
Secretary of State was just wrong. She said she did not participate in this, and yet only a few months before the attack, she outright denied security in her signature in a cable, April 2012.
Do you remember that allegation, Madam Secretary?
I do.
Well, when the Washington Post fact checker examined this claim, they gave it 4 Pinocchios. They called it a whopper. It turns out that the Republicans had a copy of that cable, but they didn't tell the American people that your so-called signature was just a stamp that appeared on millions of cables from the State Department every single year. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, Madam Secretary, my goal has always been to gather facts and to defend the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Last year, I asked our staff to compile an asked and answered database, and this specific issue was answered thoroughly. On Monday, we put out another report, and this issue was addressed yet again. But the Republicans want to keep this attack going, so they are now trying to argue that we have new emails that raise new questions. The truth is that we have reviewed these emails, and they don't contradict the previous conclusions. They confirm them. They corroborate them. We've reviewed emails from Ambassador Stevens, and they show that he asked Charlene Lamb for more security. Nothing we have obtained, not the new interviews or the new emails, changes the basic facts we have known for 3 years. Secretary Clinton, let me ask one final question, and please take as much time as you want to answer this. There's no evidence to support the Republican claims that you personally rejected security requests. So some have argued that you, since you knew the danger was increasing in Libya, you should have been in there making detailed decisions about whether there should be 5, 7, or even 9 security officers at any given post. Madam Secretary, I know you have answered over again. You might want to just elaborate and just, I have a minute and 7 seconds.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I think there has been some confusion, and I welcome the opportunity to try to clarify it to the best of my ability. With respect, as you rightly point out, the claims that were made about the cables, I think you have explained the fact, which is that it's the long-standing tradition of the State Department for cables from around the world to be sent to and sent from the State Department under the signature, over the signature of the Secretary of State. It's a stamp. It's just part of the tradition. There are millions of them, as you point out. They are sorted through and directed to the appropriate personnel. Very few of them ever come to my attention. None of them with respect to security regarding Benghazi did. Then the other point, which I thank you for raising so that perhaps I can speak to this one as well. There is, of course, information that we were obtaining about the increasingly dangerous environment in Libya, across the country, but in particular in eastern Libya. And we were aware of that, and we were certainly taking that into account. There was no actionable intelligence on September 11th, or even before that date, about any kind of planned attack on our compound in Benghazi. And there were a lot of debates, apparently, that went on within the security professionals about what to provide, because they did have to prioritize. The Accountability Review Board pointed that out. The State Department has historically, and certainly before this terrible incident, not had the amount of money that we thought would be necessary to do what was required to protect everyone. So, of course, there had to be priorities, and that was something that the security professionals dealt with. I think that both Admiral Mullen and Ambassador Pickering made it very clear that they thought that the high threat post should move to a higher level of scrutiny, and we had immediately moved to do that.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair would now recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Brooks.
Good morning, Secretary Clinton.
Morning.
Thank you for being here today. In drawing on what you just said, that very few, but no requests for Benghazi came to your attention, I'd like to show you something. This pile represents the emails that you sent or received about Libya in 2011, from February through December of 2011. This pile represents the emails you sent or received from early 2012 until the day of the attack. There are 795 emails in this pile. We've counted them. There are 67 emails in this pile in 2012. And I'm troubled by what I see here. And so my questions relate to these piles. In this pile in 2011, I see daily updates, sometimes hourly updates, from your staff about Benghazi and Chris Stevens. When I look at this pile, in 2012, I only see a handful of emails to you from your senior staff about Benghazi, and I have several questions for you about this disparity, because we know from talking to your senior advisors that they knew, and many of them are here today, seated behind you, they knew to send you important information, issues that were of importance to you, and I can only conclude by your own records that there was a lack of interest in Libya in 2012. So let's first focus, though, on this pile and what was happening in Libya in 2011. We had an ambassador to Libya, Ambassador Kretz, but you've told us that, and you told us in your opening, you handpicked Chris Stevens to be your special representative in Benghazi, and you sent him there. And by your own emails, most have provided last February, a few provided just a few weeks ago. They show that in March of 11, so we're in March of 11, you had Chris Stevens join you in Paris, where you were meeting with the leader of the Libyan revolution. And after Paris, that is when, as you talked about, Chris Stevens went into Benghazi, I believe in April 5th of 2011, on that Greek cargo ship. How long was he expected to stay? What were Chris Stevens' orders from you about Libya and about Benghazi specifically?
Chris Stevens was asked to go to Benghazi to do reconnaissance, to try to figure out who were the leaders of the insurgency who were based in Benghazi, what their goals were, what they understood would happen if they were successful. It was, as I said, the hard-nosed 21st century diplomacy that is rooted in the old-fashioned necessary work of building relationships and gathering information.
How long was he anticipated to stay in Benghazi? Do you recall?
It was open-ended. We were, in discussing it with him, unsure as to how productive it would be, whether it would be appropriate for him to stay for a long time or a short time. That was very much going to depend upon Chris's own assessment. We knew we were sending someone who understood the area, who understood the language, who understood a lot of the personalities because of the historical study that he used to love to do, and we were going to be guided by what he decided.
I'd like to draw your attention to an email. It's an email found at tab 1. It's an Ops Center email that was forwarded to you from Huma Abedin on Sunday, March 27th, that says at the bottom of the email, so the current game plan is for Mr. Stevens to move no later Wednesday from Malta to Benghazi, but the bottom of the email says the goal of this one-day trip is for him to lay the groundwork for a stay of up to 30 days. So just to refresh that recollection, I believe initially the goal was to go in for 30 days. Were you personally briefed on his security plan prior to him going into Libya? Because
yes,
at that time, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sorry to interrupt, Gaddafi's forces were still battling the rebels, correct?
Right. That's right.
And so were you personally briefed before you sent Mr. Stevens into Benghazi?
I was personally told by the officials who were in the State Department, who were immediately above Chris, who were making the plans for him to go in, that it was going to be expeditionary diplomacy. It was going to require him to make a lot of judgments on the ground about what he could accomplish, and including where it would be safe for him to be and how long for him to stay. And I think the initial decision was, you know, up to 30 days and reassess, but it could have been 10 days, it could have been 60 days, depending upon what he found and what he reported back to us.
And possibly what was determined about the danger of Benghazi. Who were those officials? Secretary
Well, there were a number of officials who were working...
That were advising you on the security specifically.
Well, with respect to the security, this was a particular concern of the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau in which Chris worked.
And I'm sorry, what was that person's name?
Assistant Secretary Jeff Feldman.
Thank you.
And it was also a concern of the Assistant Secretary for Diplomatic Security, as well as other officials within the State Department. And I think it's fair to say, Congresswoman, this was, we all knew, a risky undertaking. And it was something that was, as I said in my opening statement, more reminiscent of the way diplomacy was practiced back in the 19th century, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have instantaneous communications. You would send diplomats and envoys into places and not hear from them for maybe months. This was obviously not of that kind, but it was not that different in degree from what we had done before, and it was a risky undertaking, and one which Chris volunteered for and was anxious to undertake.
And it was so risky, I'd like to pull up another email from the Ops Center that was forwarded to you from Ms. Abedin on Sunday, April 10th. So he had been there about 5 days, and it indicates that the situation in Ajdabiya had worsened to the point where Stevens is considering departing from Benghazi. This is within 5 days of him going in. Were you aware of that concern within the first 5 days that he had gone in?
Yeah.
And did anyone share that with you? And
yes,
who did share that with you?
We were aware because we were really counting on Chris to guide us and give us the information from the ground. We had no other sources. You know, there was no American outpost. There was no, you know, American military presence. Eventually, other Americans representing different agencies were able to get into Benghazi and begin to do the same work, but they, of course, couldn't do that work overtly, which is why we wanted a diplomat who could be publicly meeting with people to try to get the best assessment. But it was always going to be a constant risk, and we knew that.
And so let me go back to the risk in 2011, because there was a lot of communication, again, once again, from your senior staff, from the State Department, to you or from you in 2011. And in fact, that is when Gaddafi fell. He fell in 2011. But then, when we go to 2012, Libya, Benghazi, Chris Stevens, the staff there, they seem to fall off your radar in 2012, and the situation's getting much worse in 2012. It was getting much worse. And let me just share for you, in your records that we have reviewed, there is not one email to you or from you in 2012 when an explosive device went off at our compound in April. There's not a single email in your records about that explosive device. So my question is, this was a very important mission in 2011. You sent Chris Stevens there, but yet when our compound is attacked in 2012, what kind of culture was created in the State Department that your folks couldn't tell you in an email about a bomb in April of 2012?
Well, Congresswoman, I did not conduct most of the business that I did on behalf of our country on email. I conducted it in meetings. I read massive amounts of memos, great deal of classified information. I made a lot of secure phone calls. I was in and out of the White House all the time. There were a lot of things that happened that I was aware of and that I was reacting to. If you were to be in my office in the State Department, I didn't have a computer. I did not do the vast majority of my work on email, and I bet there's a lot of Sid Blumenthal's emails in there from 2011, too. Well, and so I think that there were, I don't want you to have a mistaken impression about what I did and how I did it. Most of my work was not done on emails with my closest aides, with officials in the State Department, officials in the rest of the government, as well as the White House and people around the world.
And thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure that it's not all done on emails, Madam Secretary, and there are meetings and there are discussions. And so then when our compound took a second attack on June 6th, when a bomb blew a wall through the compound then, no emails at all. But I am interested in knowing, who were you meeting with? Who were you huddling with? How were you informed about those things? Because there is nothing in the emails that talks about 2 significant attacks on our compounds in 2012. There was a lot of information in 2011 about issues and security posture, and yet nothing in 2012.
Well, I'd be happy to explain. Every morning when I arrived at the State Department, usually between 8 and 8:30, I had a personal one-on-one briefing from the representative of the Central Intelligence Agency, who shared with me the highest level of classified information that I was to be aware of on a daily basis. I then had a meeting with the top officials of the State Department every day that I was in town. That's where a lot of information, including threats and attacks on our facilities, was shared. I also had a weekly meeting every Monday with all of the officials, the assistant secretaries and others, so that I could be brought up to date on any issue that they were concerned about. During the day, I received hundreds of pages of memos, many of them classified, some of them so top secret that they were brought into my office in a locked briefcase that I had to read and immediately return to the courier. And I was constantly at the White House in the Situation Room, meeting with the National Security Advisor and others. I would also be meeting with officials in the State Department, foreign officials and others. So there was a lot going on during every day. I did not email during the day, and except on rare occasions when I was able to, but I didn't conduct the business that I did primarily on email. That is not how I gathered information, assessed information, asked the hard questions of the people that I worked with.
It appears that leaving Benghazi, with respect to all of that danger, leaving Benghazi was not an option in 2012, and I yield back.
Well, if I could just quickly respond, there was never a recommendation from any intelligence official in our government, from any official in the State Department, or from any other person with knowledge of our presence in Benghazi to shut down Benghazi, even after the 2 attacks that the compound suffered. And perhaps, you know, you would wonder why, but I can tell you that it was thought that the mission in Benghazi, in conjunction with the CIA mission, was vital to our national interests.
Gentlelady from Indiana yields back. Chair will now briefly recognize Mr.
We're going to continue our live coverage in just a moment. Much more right after a quick break.
I was asking Secretary Clinton